Yeah.
Sure it has happened before. I mean, people have, Supreme Court nominees have, like Myers, have withdrawn themselves from consideration for far less explosive reasons than this one.
That's a great point. I mean, I don't remember how ultimately Robert Bork came to be, how that he was removed from the nominating process, but I know that there was a lot of questions about his beliefs and his interpretation of the Constitution, but I don't recall anybody ever having allegations as explosive disease. Perhaps there were, but I
wonder if we're now sort of permanently changing this process, right? Nancy, you talked about the fact that, with an FBI sort of vetting, the FBI vetting process probably didn't include what you did in high school.
In fact, people are on Twitter, and this is Twitter, but some people are suggesting, who are law enforcement, that the FBI doesn't actually look at stuff before you're 18.
All right. So, Nancy, do you think we could be seeing a change here? I mean, if Brett Kavanaugh, decides that he doesn't want to go through this process and removes his name, the next person who's chosen, I'm sure, is going to look back into their high school career, if you could call it that, to figure out, what missteps or misdeeds they might have participated in. Do you think what we're seeing now is a permanent change in how Supreme Court justices are chosen, that, it does matter what you did at 17 from now on?
I think that this is a very particular situation, and I'm sure that he was asked, even before he was formally vetted by the FBI, when he was vetted by the Federalist Society, or when he spoke to the White House, I'm sure they asked him, is there anything in your background that would be embarrassing? That is sort of like your basic introductory question. Are there going to be any surprises in your background? And there might be some people, if this was in their background, even when they were a teenager, who would be reluctant for this very reason to subject themselves to scrutiny and would say, you know what, I'm happy with the position I'm in. I don't think I want to go through with it. So I don't know that this one case is representative of a whole sea change, because I think that, we don't have Supreme Court nominees that often, and every single one of them is different. I mean, look at Neil Gorsuch just last year. He also went to Georgetown Prep. He is pretty close in age to Brett Kavanaugh. I don't know that they went into his high school background, but certainly no one came forward to say that he had done anything like this. So every single nominee is different. And I think, a charge of shoplifting when you're a teenager, that some background check might turn up, is a lot different than a charge of gang rape.
Julie, you wanted to chime in here on that. Julie,
we're not talking about the typical 17-year-old behavior, I assume. He's not being accused, as you had said, of a simple shoplifting that, quite frankly, most people would say, I was young, I made a stupid mistake. His behavior, if we believe it to be true, is so incredibly abhorrent and so against everything that we should be believing in terms of who our justice is. Remember, he's going to be making decisions about rights of women, as a Supreme Court judge. And so we can't ignore that. And I don't think we could ever ignore that. I think the difference here is he had done things, if we accept them to be true, that are so incredibly unacceptable that make it impossible for him to sit as a Supreme Court judge versus other people who have, little things that perhaps are their little secrets that wouldn't be relevant to a decision maker.
Just to point out again, these are allegations, and CBS News has not confirmed these allegations.
So we just are seeing a note here, and Nancy, you've seen it as well, so we'll relay that to our viewers. This comes from the Senate Judiciary Committee Communications Director. This morning, Michael Avenatti provided a declaration to the Judiciary Committee. Committee lawyers are in the process of reviewing it now. And as Anne-Marie points out, these are allegations, but I want to, because if our viewers are just tuning in to CBSN right now, we're getting close to the top of the hour. The news that attorney Michael Avenatti had been suggesting all week long that he was going to provide to the Senate Judiciary Committee and to the media is of this third accuser accusing Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of explosive instances of sexual misconduct, essentially. And I'm going to read just from her affidavit, her sworn affidavit that she has provided to Mr. Avenatti and Mr. Avenatti has provided to the press. In one of those paragraphs of her affidavit, this is, and what I'm reading from here is, I guess, what would be considered the least volatile or least explosive of the allegations. But just again, to point out why there were so many people who were concerned that Mr. Kavanaugh would be given a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court and would have the power and the decision-making over the lives of some 400 million Americans, including women, obviously. So in one of the paragraphs, she states this: following the first introduction, I attended well over 10 house parties in the Washington, D.C. area during the years 1981 to 1983, where Mark Judge is the man who is Brett Kavanaugh's friend, and Brett Kavanaugh were present. These parties were a common occurrence in the area. On numerous occasions at these parties, I witnessed Mark Judge and Brett Kavanaugh drink excessively and engage in highly inappropriate conduct, including being overly aggressive with girls, not taking no for an answer. This conduct included the fondling and grabbing of girls without their consent. I observed Brett Kavanaugh drink excessively at many of these parties and engage in abusive and physically aggressive behavior towards girls, including pressing girls against him without their consent, grinding against girls, and attempting to remove or shift girls' clothing to expose private body parts. I often witnessed Brett Kavanaugh speak in a demeaning manner about girls in general, as well as specific girls by name. I also witnessed Brett Kavanaugh behave as a mean drunk on many occasions at these parties. That is just the seventh paragraph.
Yeah.
It goes on.
Sorry, just to interject, I mean, part of the reason why those, as you pointed out, are sort of the least explosive allegations, but part of the reason why they're still important is because they directly contradict what Brett Kavanaugh said in his Fox News interview, right, and also what his friend Mark Judge says, yes, who sort of dismissed their relationship and said, right, that he'd never really seen, Brett Kavanaugh at these sort of parties behaving in this sort of way. And so this directly contradicts what both of those men say. And that's why I read that first, because I sort of think that we have him on the record, Julie, in that Fox News interview, suggesting that he's essentially a choir boy, that he goes to, he went to church and he hung out with his parents. Mm-hmm. Did you agree with Ricky Kleeman's take that this was an ill-advised interview?
Absolutely. I agree with her when we say that as an attorney, you tell your client not to say a word because anything you say is going to be used against you. And even those things you say that you think are innocent or going to make you be portrayed as someone, as you described as the choir boy, are going to come back to haunt you because now, A, we have the ability to cross-examine you on things you said before, and now we have other witnesses that are specifically contradicting things that he said in that Fox News interview in and of itself. And so, I think it's incredibly going to be even more difficult for him, certainly if you have some good cross-examiners in there.
So you've got, all right, so Julie, stand by. Nancy, please stand by. I hope you can, because joining us on the phone right now is criminal defense attorney Vinoo Varghese. He's also a former prosecutor. All right, Mr. Prosecutor, you're receiving this, you're representing, or you're looking at this information, you're looking at this affidavit, and now you're not as a prosecutor, you're as a criminal defense attorney, you've got to represent Mr. Kavanaugh. What's your take?
I think first, the timing is suspect, and I think you have to look at that, right? I mean, these hearings have been going on for a while, and this isn't the first time that Judge Kavanaugh has been before the Senate. He was up for the confirmation process for the D.C. Circuit. So you have to look at that from that perspective. That being said, because of the amount of, because now the number of accusations, there are 3 separate accusers, and because of the seriousness of this particular allegation, there is, I think it warrants an investigation and a delay in the process for this to be fully vetted. I think Kavanaugh, people have to still respect Kavanaugh and say, look, the guy has to be presumed innocent. He must be. That's the bedrock of our institution. All these other things, at this point, the timing, the fact that you're talking about stuff from 35 plus years ago, I think all of that weighs into the total equation. But at this point, all of this merits, it has to merit investigation because we are talking about the U.S. Supreme Court.
Julie, I've always been curious about that sort of tack that some of Mr. Kavanaugh's supporters, including members of the Senate, have taken, which is these are allegations from 35 years ago when they were teenagers. You know, all of us, I mean, any reasonable person would say that, you know, when you're a child, which is what you are before you're 18, you do stupid things, but not all of us would suggest that some of the things that are alleged here are typical of an American or anybody in whatever country. But I'm always curious by the idea, well, this happened 35 years ago. Somebody brought up the point to me that, you know, when victims of the priests who have sexually abused children finally come to grips and are willing to go on the record with the allegations that they may have been inappropriately aggressed by priests, we don't say to them, well, this happened when you were 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, so they can't be true. Prosecutors take that and they try to figure out what happened.
Well, here's the thing. Whether something happened 35 years ago or it happened yesterday, as a prosecutor, you have to look at each specific case and make a determination as to the credibility. It doesn't, you know, you can have someone who says something happened yesterday and they're lying about it. So the fact that it happened 35 years ago is obviously something to consider, but you also have to consider why it is. And if the victims give a valid and credible reason as to why they didn't come forward, then it really doesn't mean anything. Now, keep in mind also that, you know, we did live in a different time 35 years ago where some of this behavior was either acceptable or, remember, you know, if you're a woman who is attacked by one of these young men or abused by one of these young men, they had an entire school of boys that kind of, as far as they were concerned, stood behind them. And so it may have been incredibly difficult to step forward. I do want to say one thing when we talk about presumption of innocence. This is not a criminal trial. This is not a criminal trial where the presumption exists. And so when we talk about these affidavits, it's not going to be a beyond a reasonable doubt situation. It's, is there credible evidence enough to establish that Kavanaugh should not be sitting as the Supreme Court judge? We're not telling him he has to go to jail. We're telling him he can't serve on the Supreme Court, which makes decisions for the rest of his life. That's the difference.
You know, you brought up something sort of interesting about 35 years ago. One of the things to factor in or to consider is that it was a different time. And I want to ask Nancy about the fact that we are in the Me Too era. Mm-hmm. You know, when we talk about Bill Cosby, who is, you know, spent the night in prison, he was going to jail for several years. And the very accusation is that he participated, not witnessed, but he drugged women and sexually assaulted them. You know, those allegations came up before this era. But it's only now that they were able to prosecute and convict him. I'm wondering, you know, how you feel about how the Me Too movement and the era that we're in factors into what's happening here with Brett Kavanaugh.
Well, I think that it is a huge factor in the fact that so many Democrats and some Republicans said from the outset, even after just one woman came forward, I believe her, or I think that we need to explore what she's saying. If you think back to 20 years ago and either President Clinton's impeachment proceedings or even further back when he was accused of lewd behavior by a couple of women in his past, Democrats didn't want to believe it, and so they didn't believe it. They, by and large, chose that they would believe him over these accusers, and they looked for various reasons why these women were unreliable. And that still happens, but the overwhelming presumption now is that, you know, it is very painful for women to come forward, and if they are coming forward, you know, it is not open and shut, but they deserve to be heard because there's a very strong chance that there is at least something to what they are saying. And certainly when you start to hear from more women, you know, that makes each woman even more believable. And I can't stress enough what a volatile situation we are now in. You know, on Monday, a lot of us came to work half expecting that perhaps Kavanaugh would be withdrawing because of the accusations that had already been leveled, and that didn't happen. In fact, he and Republicans doubled down. Now we are, now that these new allegations and very disturbing allegations have been made, anything is possible. Chuck Grassley could come out of his office at any moment and say, the hearing is postponed. He's opening an investigation. He's conferring with Republican leadership. Anything could happen over the next couple of hours that would influence the this big hearing that we're all expecting to cover tomorrow, that is expected to last the entire day. Brett Kavanaugh could announce that he is taking a step back in light of these allegations. They doubled down on Monday. Maybe they've played that card. Maybe they haven't. But I can guarantee you that conversations are taking place in a fast and furious manner across this Capitol and between the leader's office and the White House right now.
And Nancy, I know that you've got to go. Please tell your producer, John Nolan, that we're sorry that we've kept you here with us for so long, but you've provided such a wealth of information. But John and Nancy, before you go, I just have one final question, and then we'll let you wrap it up. Anita Hill, you talked about Bill Cosby and the era of Me Too, that the allegations against Mr. Cosby happened before the Me Too era. Well, the 1991 confirmation hearing for Judge Clarence Thomas was well before the Me Too movement. Anita Hill wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and she said this, that the Senate Judiciary Committee still lacks a protocol for vetting sexual harassment and assault claims that surfaced during a confirmation hearing, and that it suggests that the committee has learned little from the Thomas hearing, much less the more recent Me Too movement. Why has the Senate dilly-dallied, Nancy, when it comes to this? And I'm guessing, I think the American people are hoping that after this, no matter how it ends up, that they will not further do that.
Yeah, I wonder, but Nancy, you can answer in a second, but, at least with the Anita Hill situation, there was an FBI investigation.
Right.
I wonder if things have almost moved backwards a little bit, but Nancy.
Well, first of all, the Senate dilly-dallies on all kinds of things. So, it's not like they are specifically putting this off. They're putting all kinds of things off. Mostly because Senate Republicans have been primarily intent on using their time on the Senate floor to confirm as many judges as possible before the midterm elections. And so you haven't seen much extraneous legislation make its way to the Senate floor, like legislation that would change the rules of sexual harassment reporting in Congress, because they simply just don't want to take up a couple of days on the Senate floor that they could be using to confirm yet another conservative judge. They don't know if Democrats are going to take control of the Senate, and that window will close. So they want to get as much of that done right now as they can. Beyond that, there is a bit of self-protection going on, and this worry that they will somehow give up too much power to primarily women, but also men who might report sexual harassment by a colleague or even by a member of Congress. And there are concerns about false reports that can create a lasting stain on one's reputation. And so, just simply put, there are a lot of senators who have paid lip service to the notion of modernizing the rules, but it is not something that there is a lot of passion for, particularly among a lot of the older male senators.
All right. Nancy Cordes, our chief congressional correspondent, who has spent the better part of an hour with us breaking down the explosive news out of Attorney Michael Avenatti. We thank you. Thank John Nolan for us as well. I know you've got a busy couple of hours ahead before the evening news. And again, tomorrow for CBS This Morning. We always appreciate it, Nancy.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so a few moments ago, Michael Avenatti was on The View talking about these new claims, and he says that his client is ready to testify.
She is willing to testify. Again, she's willing to meet with the FBI forthwith, immediately, to describe what she witnessed. She's prepared to provide additional corroborating witnesses' names to the FBI associated with that investigation, and we're hopeful that the committee is going to respond immediately by calling for an FBI investigation so that all of these allegations can be properly vetted and the truth can be known.
What if the Judiciary Committee does not respond? and they say, we're just going to go ahead with the plan, which is to, we'll hear the two of them tomorrow and then vote on Friday. What happens then?
Well, we have a couple options. I'm not going to disclose what they are at this point in time, but we have planned for that. Although, Joy, I will tell you that I think that would be absolutely outrageous under the circumstances. There should be no rush to confirm this man to the U.S. Supreme Court. Delaying this matter a week or a month or slightly more than a month would be of no consequence. We need to make sure that we get this right, 100% right, before a vote in the U.S. Senate is taken on his confirmation for a lifetime, potentially, to the U.S. Supreme Court.
All right. So that was attorney Michael Avenatti appearing on The View just earlier. If you're just joining us here at the top of the hour on CBSN, the news from Michael Avenatti. He has revealed the third accuser, the third person to accuse Supreme Court nominee Judge Brett Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct. This is the tweet from Mr. Kavanaugh about an hour, from Mr. Avenatti about an hour ago. And it reads, this is the picture of my client, Julie Swetnick. She is courageous, brave, and honest. We ask that her privacy and that of her family be respected. You just heard Mr. Avenatti on The View saying that his client is ready to testify. The sworn affidavit that she has provided, which Mr. Avenatti has provided to the members of the media, includes an allegation, and I'll just read it because I want to make sure I get my language correct. It says, in part, I also witnessed efforts by Mark Judge, Brett Kavanaugh, and others to cause girls to become inebriated and disorientated so they can be gang raped in a side room or bedroom by a train, and train is in quotes, of numerous boys. I have a firm recollection of seeing boys lined up outside many rooms at many of these parties, waiting for their turn with a girl inside the room. These boys included Mark Judge and Brett Kavanaugh. Now, in a statement, a prepared written testimony of Mr. Kavanaugh that will be, I guess, if the hearings happen tomorrow, on the floor of the Senate Judiciary Committee, in part of the statement, the testimony that he's prepared to deliver, it says, sometimes, this is quoting Mr. Kavanaugh in his testimony, the prepared written testimony for the nomination hearings tomorrow, quote, sometimes I had too many. In retrospect, I said and did things in high school that make me cringe now, but that's not why we are here today. What I have been accused of is far more serious than juvenile misbehavior. I never did anything remotely resembling what Dr. Ford describes. On the phone with us is attorney Julie Rendelman, and also on the phone with us is criminal defense attorney Vinoo Varghese. So first to you, Julie. I mean, let's reset here at the top of the hour for our viewers. I mean, I've just read one of the more explosive allegations by Ms. Swetnick in the sworn affidavit, and now we have the prepared written testimony of Brett Kavanaugh. He's only addressing Dr. Ford's allegation, but what's your take on where this goes?
Look, I mean, here's the question you have to ask is, if you believe Kavanaugh, if you're one of his supporters, then what's wrong with doing a further investigation to vet the truthfulness of these witnesses? You know, if the point is to try to garner the truth and get to kind of whether or not there is in fact corroboration of this witness or these three witnesses, then now is the time to take the time to make it to do a thorough investigation to determine whether or not there are in fact other witnesses, as this new victim has said, witnesses or individuals that were there to witness other individuals being either assaulted or verbally abused, any of those things. What is the reason in the world not to put this on hold?
So I just want to play a little more sound from Michael Avenatti, talking about the seriousness of making an accusation like this. Let's just play that sound.
She understands the magnitude of these allegations. She does not make them lightly. She has thoroughly reviewed the declaration. We have gone over it in detail. She knows exactly what is contained within the declaration, and I'm looking forward to an investigatory process that allows for the truth to be known. The American public deserves to know what happened and about the character, about Brett Kavanaugh. And let me also say this, and then unfortunately I've got to run, but there is no excuse for the committee and for Brett Kavanaugh not calling Mark Judge to testify for the committee. This is a man that is one of the closest friends of Brett Kavanaugh at the time period at issue, and all you have to know is that they are hiding him. They are hiding Mark Judge from the American people, and I can assure you if he had positive things to say about this time period and positive things to say about Brett Kavanaugh's conduct, we would have already heard from him.
All right, Vinoo, you're a former prosecutor, also a defense attorney. You've been on both sides of this. In regards to Mark Judge, now, my understanding is that Mark Judge made a statement. The committee didn't think he could add value to his testimony, wouldn't add value, and so they didn't demand that he appear in front of them. But now, with all of these accusations, Vinoo, do you agree with Michael Avenatti that really, they've got to cough him up, that Mark Judge needs to present himself in front of the committee?
I'm not sure if he does or he doesn't. I mean, I think it potentially could be helpful. I mean, he's being named here, potentially helpful to Kavanaugh. Look, I would say this: the allegations here, obviously, of such a horrible nature, it does warrant further investigation. My understanding is that investigation has to be ordered by the president, by the White House, and it's an extension of the background check, an investigation by the FBI. It'd just be a continuation of the background check that's already happened. In terms of the allegation, though, this is what's important to understand. Just because Michael Avenatti says that she signs this declaration doesn't make the declaration true. Just because she signed under the penalty of perjury doesn't make it true. Understand that she's not been subject to cross-examination, and just something that Julie said earlier several minutes ago, that while this isn't a criminal trial, the allegations are criminal. And so it's my belief that if you're going to move forward on a guy or deny him a vote because of these allegations, well, then these allegations need to be vetted properly and held to the highest standard under the law, which is that of, beyond a reasonable doubt. While it is not a criminal case, these are explosive allegations, and you have a man who's passed six different FBI checks previously. So now, when these things are coming out at the 11th hour, they should be vetted, viewed with suspicion. And I think, and here's where I do agree with Julie, I think that Kavanaugh should welcome an FBI check.
Yeah, but Vinoo, but hold on one second, Vinoo. I just want to push, Vinoo,
there's no way their allegations are going to be proved true, and there's no way their allegations are going to be proven false.
I just want to, Vinoo, push back a little bit.
How old these were.
I want to push back a little bit on there's two things. One, this 11th hour, I mean, we spoke to Nancy about that. The 11th hour is upon us because that is what the Senate has decreed is the 11th hour. They could take the time to investigate these, as many people have called for. The other thing is, the idea, it's hard for me to believe that a woman, would put these allegations out there and not understand the enormity and the risks involved. Generally, 70%, the statistics are valid, 70% of women who are sexually abused do not ever report it. They never report it, even when they are faced with the opportunity to do so at much later times in their life. So I think we need to be careful that we're not suggesting that just because this is happening when it's happening would suggest that the allegations are not true. I understand that people can make things up. I understand that there's a lot of politics involved in this, but it strikes me that we have to strike that tone where we don't try to suggest that just because it's coming out when it's coming out somehow means that it didn't happen or that there might not be some level of truthfulness.
No, but I think people are going to question her statement, right? They're going to rip it apart. They're going to wonder about the timing. And she's sort of acknowledging that she had an understanding or an awareness that there were crimes taking place, right? Over and over again. Right. And she ultimately became a victim of that crime, but she never came forward. And that's going to be one of the questions, I presume, Vinoo, you've been a defense attorney. That's one of the questions that's probably going to be raised.
Look, let me address that first with Vladimir and then to Anne-Marie. Like, Vladimir, when you cite statistics like this, it's Mark Twain who said there are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics, right? How would you be able to prove whether 70% of women are telling the truth or actually have been sexually assaulted. When you use the term sexual assault, that's a term defined in the penal law of each state. So, the only way to prove that something happened is if it actually goes through the process. So when I say the 11th hour, the hearings ended a week ago. And, again, I'm not going to get into the politics of this. I do believe that the allegations are of such a serious nature, they require further investigation and that there should be an FBI investigation. What I'm saying, however, is from the point of view of looking at this, people need to take a step back and should not presume that Brett Kavanaugh is guilty. The nature of these things, and this is why we have statutes of limitations. Memories get faded, witnesses disappear. People may not remember, and that's why it's important that crimes be properly reported. You can take into the fact that, yes, the allegations of sexual assault of such nature, people may not report it right away. But the fact that she talked, the first accuser, that she spoke to her therapist in 2012, doesn't mean that Brett Kavanaugh did this 35 years ago. And I think that's the important thing that I want to stress here, that, we have to give Kavanaugh the benefit of the doubt, but I think it's to his benefit to have the FBI thoroughly investigate. But what's going to happen is there's no way to prove or disprove any of these claims. And I think you're going to end up with a stalemate, but it requires further investigation at this point.
Let me just read the statistics from the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network when it comes to reports of sexual violence crimes and why people generally do not report them. These are the following reasons: 20% fear retaliation, 13% believe the police would not do anything to help, 13% believed it was a personal matter, 8% reported to a different official, 8% believed it was not important enough to report, 7% did not want to get the perpetrator in trouble, 2% believed the police could not or would not do anything to help, and 30% gave another reason or do not cite one reason. So, Julie, to you, I mean, this notion that that because these things happened so long ago, because they weren't presented to the proper authorities at the time, and because they are coming out now, which I think anybody who's spoken on this subject in the last 2 weeks or so has understood that it has become increasingly political. There's no doubt about that. But I wonder what your take is on it.
And, I appreciate Vinoo talking about this presumption. Again, this is not a criminal case. So, and remember, some of the allegations that are being made against him are not criminal. They are indications that he was a heavy drinker and was disrespectful to women. Those specific, even if we ignore for one moment the criminal charges, even if we accept that some of that is true, that in and of itself becomes a question as to whether or not he should serve as the Supreme Court judge. So remember, it doesn't have to be criminal for them to make a vote based on the fact that they think that at some point in his life he was so disrespectful to women that it makes it impossible for him to make a judgment now in regards to such important things with regards to the law. Now, in terms of, again, when we talk about something happening 35 years ago, yes, anytime any individual in a criminal process comes forward and makes an allegation, keep in mind, not just about rape, about any type of crime, it is the job of a prosecutor to vet that witness, vet to make a determination as to whether that person is credible, vet to make a determination as to whether there's corroboration. Does the individual have some type of mental disorder or disease that may cause them to not be truthful? So, of course, they have to be vetted. And we expect that, or should expect that they'd be vetted in this scenario. But again, I don't know that we're obligated at this stage to give Kavanaugh the benefit of the doubt. We now have 3 witnesses that have come forward who have made sworn affidavits and have been clear that not only they're willing to talk about it in writing, but they're willing to be cross-examined. So I'm not sure at this point he's entitled to that presumption anymore, not in this setting.
So, Julie, we know that the GOP hired a female prosecutor to do the questioning at tomorrow. Her name's Rachel Mitchell. I imagine she is ferociously rewriting whatever her plan was in terms of questioning both Judge Kavanaugh and Dr. Ford. I mean, what do you see her role as right now? And you just, how dicey is this moving forward for her?
Well, it's funny, you know, and I think we can all agree it's interesting that they went and chose not only a prosecutor, but they chose a female. And I think that was purposeful because I think that when we think back to Anita Hill, when she was surrounded by a bunch of men asking her the most inappropriate questions, I think it's all, as far as I recall, a cringeworthy moment. So I think that they're certainly trying to lessen it by bringing in a female. But female or male, you have to be incredibly careful how you cross-examine this individual. Because if you go at her too aggressive, you're going to turn off the viewers. And when I say the viewers, the people that are in that room watching. And if she is one of those type of individuals that's quiet or soft-spoken, it may actually, being too aggressive to her, may actually lend credibility to what she has to say. So I think male or female, they're going to have to be super careful in how they cross-examine this individual.
Yeah, I don't know if hiring a woman, I know that the concern was, you know, the optics, that you didn't want a group of older men, you know, grilling a sexual assault victim. But I don't know if hiring a woman is really going to make much of a difference. It quite possibly sends the message that these group of men don't have the ability to, in a reasonable, responsible, compassionate way, question a victim.
Yeah. Well, I think there is this level of kind of, it's a little transparent to pick a woman, and not to say that a woman can't handle the job. I'm sure she can, but if she's too aggressive, then she's not going to be. I don't think the fit here is an incredibly aggressive cross-examiner. I think it's a cross-examiner that knows how to listen and knows how to calmly bring the victim through the case to try to poke holes in her story. And so she has to be incredibly, incredibly, incredibly careful how she, you know, kind of navigates that cross-examination.
It's also surprising, and I think both of you, you, Julie, and Vinoo, have, during the course of our conversation, there's been so much that has happened that we've talked about a lot of things, but I believe that both of you suggested down in light of these recent allegations from this third accuser that you would want to hear from Mark Judge, who was Brett Kavanaugh's best friend in high school, because now he seems to be, in almost every instance that these allegations have come out, he is named as somebody who was at least aware of the behavior of Mr. Kavanaugh. And I just went back, because it just sort of piqued my memory, and I went back and looked at the New Yorker article that Ronan Farrow wrote with Jane Meyer that came out this week, and they interviewed Mr. Judge's girlfriend, and in one of the quotes here, her name is Elizabeth Razor. She dated Mark Judge for 3 years. This is quoting from the New Yorker article. She recalled that Judge had told her ashamedly of an incident that involved him and other boys taking turns having sex with a drunk woman. Razor said that Judge seemed to regard it as fully consensual. She said that Judge did not name others involved in the incident, and she has no knowledge that Kavanaugh participated, but was disturbed by the story and noted that it undercut Judge's protestations about the sexual innocence at Georgetown Prep, which is where both he and Brett Kavanaugh went to high school. So you and Vinoo do agree that at this point you would recommend to the Senate that they at least hear from Mr. Judge?
Yeah, I'm probably not as interested in hearing from Mr. Judge, and the reason I have to be honest at this point is I don't believe he's going to tell the truth.
Oh, wow.
And so,
that's interesting. In front of the Senate. I mean, you can go to jail for lying to the Senate.
Yeah, but, you have to remember also that it's difficult in this setting to disprove what he's going to say because we're not going to have DNA evidence, we're not going to have video, we're not going to have those things that potentially we would need to prove that he's not being forthright. Now, I believe part of the reason he's not coming in is because I don't believe that he thinks he can tell the truth. But I don't know at the end of the day if he is going to make or break this case. I think it's I think we all go back to the idea that this should be further vetted and we shouldn't be rushing to, certainly if we were on trial with this case, we sure as heck wouldn't be rushing to try it tomorrow when we just found out about an additional complainant coming forward today. And so certainly we would expect that when there's a decision of this importance, when it's determining who's going to be someone who's going to be making these decisions for his entire lifetime, that we can give it a little time. But I think what's most important important is hearing from the various witnesses, which are the alleged victims in the case, and then anyone that could corroborate and support what they say. Now, if the Republicans or if Mr. Kavanaugh thinks that Mr. Judge can credibly come in and vouch for him, then by all means, one would think they'd want him to. But then he's going to be subject to cross-examination.
So I just want to read a statement by Senator Chuck Schumer, Democratic leader Chuck Schumer. Republicans need to immediately suspend the proceedings related to Judge Kavanaugh's nomination, and the president must order the FBI to reopen the background check investigation. There are now multiple corroborated allegations against Judge Kavanaugh made under the penalty of perjury, all of which deserve a thorough investigation. I strongly believe Judge Kavanaugh should withdraw from consideration. If he will not, at the very least, the hearing and the vote should be postponed while the FBI investigates all of these allegations. If our Republican colleagues proceed without an investigation, it would be a travesty for the honor of the Supreme Court and our country. Vinoo, you have expressed the assertion that, Judge Kavanaugh is innocent until proven guilty, and, this is not a court of law. But I have to wonder, because that he's trying to be a Supreme Court justice and not anything else,
he'll go back to his life if he withdraws.
I wonder if he will be able to go back to being a judge, right? But do you think perhaps, though of course the presumption of innocence is always there, the fact that he is attempting to be a Supreme Court justice makes this case just a little more sensitive?
I'd agree with that. I mean, look, he's getting this is the United States Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. It's a lifetime appointment, but understand he already has a lifetime appointment.
Right. As
the Court of Appeals judge in D.C. So this is obviously the zenith of a lawyer's career to be chosen to be on the Supreme Court. I think that Chuck Schumer. I'm not saying I don't believe that Judge Kavanaugh should withdraw his nomination. However, I do believe that this warrants further FBI investigation. And again, this is while Julie and I agree. While it's not a criminal case, he's being accused of crimes. With this allegation that he was involved potentially in a train and that he sexually assaulted.
Well, we should just clarify, because in her statement, I'm not sure if we lost Vinoo, but in her statement, she says that that she had been sexually assaulted, and Mark Judge and Brett Kavanaugh were present. She doesn't accuse them of assaulting her. She says that she was aware of sexual assaults going on in side rooms or bedrooms. She doesn't say she witnessed them, but she saw young men lining up to take their turn, and in that lineup, often she saw Brett Kavanaugh and Mark Judge.
And we should point out that we are keeping an eye on Mr. Avenatti's Twitter feed. Gabriel Sherman, who's a correspondent at Vanity Fair, well-sourced within the White House, tweeted this earlier. He says, White House shocked by Avenatti claims, privately aides involved in nominations saying this could be the end of the line for Kavanaugh, per outside advisor briefed on discussions. Again, this is coming from Gabriel Sherman. He's a reporter for Vanity Fair. Michael Avenatti, responding to that tweet, says this shows how incompetent the White House is. They must not have been paying attention in the last 7 months. Guess their chief information sources are Fox News, Tucker Carlson, and 4chan. So essentially, the assertion by Gabriel Sherman in talking to his sources at the White House, Julie, is that even though Avenatti had been talking about this and it appeared on television to sort of tease the news that he had made contact with a third accuser, they are still shocked by this, and the thinking, at least according to Gabe, is that this may be something that sinks this potential nominee.
Well, there is a time when it's time to cut your losses, and one questions at this point, or one wonders whether this is not that time. They remember, if they push this too hard and these witnesses come in and they're credible, and Kavanaugh is not, then it causes them problems, not just in this situation, but who their next choice is. And so, if they at least can have some appearance of saying, you know what, we don't want to put these women through it, and we can't stand behind a person who, even if we accept the most, even if we were to accept the most severe, serious charges aren't true, but that was so inappropriate and misguided on his treatment of women during that period of time that we're not going to stand behind him, then maybe they'll get a little more credibility when it comes to trying to choose the next person.
So in watching all this play out, it feels to me at least that, this is sort of going to play out in courtrooms and in districts all across the country. And I wonder if these allegations that are being made against Mr. Kavanaugh, however it turns out, will this make both of your jobs, you and Vinoo, will it make it harder if, for example, you're a prosecutor and now you've got somebody who's not going after a Supreme Court nominee, but who suggests that, for example, a school superintendent or somebody who is, a state senator did something when, 10, 15, 25 years ago. In this era of Me Too, does such a high-profile case, does that empower more women to come forward, or does it sort of, as we pointed out earlier, suggest that there's so much heat and there's so much scrutiny and attention on this from the media and from others and from people who have political agendas that this may continue to drive folks who feel that they have a story to tell to not tell that story to lawyers?
I think it makes both sides more difficult. I think it makes it more difficult for the prosecutor, one, because the prosecutor has to look. In a sense, it should be more difficult for the prosecutor when we think about Harvey Weinstein and kind of, what occurred or what didn't occur during this whole period of time that amounted to him getting arrested now. There's a lot of questions that are being asked as to why the prosecution dropped the ball throughout those years. So, the prosecutor's job is not just to vet, to make to not arrest, but also to make determination as to when witnesses are credible, whether they're corroborated. If they are, to go forward if they believe that there's a criminal case against them. Now, as a defense attorney, I think, I'm sure Vinoo would agree, it's made it more difficult in certain ways because obviously, when you have a less high-powered client who's being accused of something, one is concerned that the prosecutor is going to treat those cases that they treated less seriously before more seriously now. And obviously, as a defense attorney, you don't want that. You want, these cases to be resolved the way they used to be because that's your job as a defense attorney. So certainly, I think it's making both sides a little more conscientious and a little more concerned about, what their jobs really are.
So we have sort of the latest statement from Brett Kavanaugh. It's obviously brief. It's
from Raj Shah.
Yeah, from Raj Shah. The quote from the judge is, "This is ridiculous and from the Twilight Zone. I don't know who this is, and this never happened."
Well, who this is, according to the sworn affidavit, is a high-ranking United States government official who has held the following, and she does point out they're inactive, but top secret clearances for the U.S. Department of State, the Department of Justice, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, as well as Customs and Border Protection. Vinoo, and then Julie, the fact that Judge Kavanaugh comes out with a statement that is unequivocal here, this is ridiculous, and from the Twilight Zone, I don't know who this is, and this never happened. I mean, how easy or how hard will it be able to prove that he actually, let's forget all this other stuff, that he actually knew her or didn't know her?
I mean, when I see this never happened, the first thing that comes up to in my mind is, well, which this? I mean, there's so many allegations in her statement that he said didn't happen,
right?
That others have said indeed that it did.
Drinking.
I don't even know when.
Let's just go with drinking excessively.
Right.
He says this never happened. So far, not just these three accusers, but other people have suggested that he was a heavy drinker. Now, his attorney appeared on our air this morning and said that there are other people who say that he is exactly as he described himself on Fox News. But I wonder, Vinoo, coming out, I mean, as a prosecutor, as a criminal defense attorney, how hard or easy will it be to just disprove this? I don't know who this person is.
Well, as I was saying earlier, I think it's going to be very difficult to prove or disprove these allegations.
But that he doesn't know her? But that he doesn't know her?
How are they going to prove that? I mean, he went to an all-boys school. It's possible that he may have been at a party with her. Who knows? I mean, this is. I understand why Kavanaugh is making these statements, and I think for him, he's all in. Obviously, the Republicans are all in. So, he's making the statement, and I think it's going to be very difficult. But this is where I think the Senate should take a break and set up new hearings and conduct the investigation. I think it's just absolutely, at this point, stupid not to. And I get the political, reasons for going forward, but ultimately, they're going to shoot themselves in the foot, because if they don't vet these things and this man goes to the Supreme Court, I think there's going to be payback to them in the long run.
Yeah, that's, there's a lot of talk about wanting to get him on the Supreme Court, before the Supreme Court begins, the term begins, but more importantly, before the midterm elections. This is, even going, as we go forward, we talked about this earlier, there's always going to be sort of a caveat associated with his name, I think. These are probably the most scandalous, explosive allegations in regards to a Supreme Court nominee that I have ever heard. And I don't know how he's going to get out from under that.
Anybody in the public eye.
Right. But I wonder, like being a defense attorney, so we've got this statement, it's a couple of sentences here, but I'm wondering how you would advise a client, and whether you would just say, no statements, don't say anything at all.
That is the course of action you would take, right? But this isn't a normal situation. I mean, this is where Julie and I agree. This isn't a criminal case. This isn't something during an investigation. If before arrests are made, we tend to tell our clients, if they come to us early enough, not to say anything and allow the investigation to take its course. And we may provide assistance to prosecutors and lead them on certain ways without them speaking to our client. But this is a different situation. He's already testified. He's gone through a hearing. At this point, it's either withdraw or go 100% ahead. Right. And he's choosing to go 100% ahead. And I think that actually they have to continue to reopen the investigation into his background, and allow all these people to come forward, because what may ultimately happen is that when these people testify, that they may not appear credible. And this is where I think that the prosecutor that's been hired by the Republicans, I actually disagree with Julie on this. I think that she should go hard on everyone and take that position, because their allegations have to be vetted, and there's no reason to tippy toe around this. We shouldn't treat people differently because of their gender. If they're making an accusation of this magnitude, well, then they should be subjected to whatever cross-examination any witness who makes such an allegation should be subjected to. Now, if that's being too delicate with them, I think that doesn't serve the purpose. Now, if the objection is to get to the truth, well, whatever that objective, however you do that, you should do that. And I think that they should all be subjected. I mean, look, there's going to be, basically at the end of this, an accounting. Okay, this witness said this. These are the things that support her position. These are the things that on the other hand, that go against it. So you do the accounting, you get the pluses and minuses, and then the Republicans at that point can make a determination of, do we have more pluses and minuses? At this point, though, I wouldn't be surprised, though, if there is a pause. I mean, there should be, at the very least.
In the affidavit, Julie, Ms. Swetnick says this in paragraph 13. In approximately 1982, I became the victim of one of these, quote, gang or, quote, train rapes, where Mark Judge and Brett Kavanaugh were present. Shortly after the incident, I shared what had transpired with at least 2 other people. During the incident, I was incapacitated without my consent and unable to fight off the boys raping me. I believe I was drugged using Quaaludes or something similar placed in what I was drinking. And the reason I highlight that paragraph is because, as Anne-Marie has pointed out, and as we've been discussing, it does not say that Mark Judge and Brett Kavanaugh participated, but that they were there. She says that she was drugged, that she was unable to give her consent, and she was unable to fight off the boys that were raping her. She believes, and this is just her assertion, that she was drugged using some either Quaaludes or something else placed in what she was drinking. I mean, if you're, for lack of a better word, cross-examining her, and you're this person that the Republicans have chosen to examine and to talk to, for example, Dr. Ford, I mean, how do you take that paragraph and what do you say to somebody who says that they were a victim, but that they were incapacitated, they were drugged, they remember two individuals being there, but that's all that they have to go on. It happened 30 plus years ago.
Right. So let's be clear. When we talk about how we're going about cross-examining a female, a male, no matter who it is, we're not talking. The relevance isn't whether it's a male or a female. It's you have to know as a prosecutor and defense attorney who the witness is and who that witness is and how they're going to portray themselves and how they're going to behave, whether it's on the stand or in a hearing, is going to dictate how you cross-examine them. You can be aggressive with a witness without yelling at them and without insulting them. And so, as we know from prior hearings, a lot of attorneys and non-attorneys just don't know how the heck to get someone or cross-examine someone the right way. And so we have to, again, be very careful, and this woman has to be very careful when she's cross-examining, how to toe the line. It doesn't matter if she's a woman or a man, but she has to recognize that, that being too aggressive with certain witnesses can backfire. Now, when it comes to these specific allegations, obviously the questions you're going to want to ask her are not just about, that day, but kind of that period of time, like in terms of trying to determine why she didn't come forward and, kind of who she told and kind of what surrounded her at that time. The problem that the cross-examiner has is a lot of the questions she may ask will give answers that are going to hurt her. Because, for example, if I say, hey, who did you tell? And she names two people, then potentially you have two witnesses that are going to arguably corroborate what she said. So you're hurting your case when you do that type of cross-examination. So it is not an easy cross-examination. I don't envy her. I certainly wouldn't mind doing it, but it's going to be tough. I also want to add one thing. When we talk about kind of the stigma regarding, Mr. Judge Kavanaugh, when I talk about, Clarence Thomas to my children, the first thing that comes to mind, and remember, the allegations against him were not as serious, is a Coke can. That's what I think about every time. That's the only image that stays in my head. Just imagine what would happen if Kavanaugh became a Supreme Court justice.
Can I just ask also, Julie, and Vinoo, you can jump in on this too. What should we, the public, be looking for when we watch the cross-examination? Not by members of the Senate, because we know that there will be some level of politics involved there, but from this person who supposedly is meant to be bipartisan or neutral. What should we be looking for to see if she's at least, and to Vinoo, to your point, she can be tough. I don't think anybody's expecting her to not be tough, but what should we be looking for as we listen to her, as we listen to her questions, her probing, to indicate to us that she is being fair, and what would be a red flag to suggest that she's not being fair to either Dr. Ford or to Judge Kavanaugh? Julie, you can go first.
I was going to say, Vinoo, do you want to take this one?
I'll go. I think it's just the prosecutor who's going to be doing the questioning, she's got to gather information, and that's part of it. And Julie raises a good point that there may be other people that she talked to. This is a tough position for this prosecutor to be in, because most of the time the prosecutors have had background information. They've talked to witnesses, and it doesn't appear they'll have that opportunity here. So, look, in terms of what you're going to be looking for, you're going to be looking for evasiveness, the ability to answer questions, direct questions, and she's going to ask him, well, why didn't you go forward? Okay, well, where were you during this period when he was up, for Senate confirmations back in, when he became a judge or the circuit court judge? And the question, look, I think there's another issue here. Since there have been 6 FBI background checks of this guy that Kavanaugh has gone through previously, you've got to re-examine those checks. And I don't think either Republicans or Democrats should proceed without re-examining those checks, because did these people come into the crosshairs of the FBI previously? Were they ever questioned previously, or were people around them questioned? And if people around them were questioned and there was no allegation of this way back when, and presumably there wasn't, because this never came up when he was appointed to be the D.C. Circuit Court judge. Well, you know, if they were or nearby or available to be questioned, like, why didn't this come up earlier? So that question is, why didn't it come up? Because she didn't want to talk about it for 30 years. Well, I think, you know, listen, there can be sympathy to a point, but there has to be vetted, and this is, again, why it's important to look at everything else around it, why there are statutes of limitations and why they're important.
Vinoo, you know, Rachel Mitchell is also going to have to question Judge Kavanaugh. One of the sort of hallmarks of these confirmation hearings typically is that the judge is somewhat evasive. They're vague about where they stand on hot button issues. He was particularly skillful at. That's not going to fly. That's not going to fly, right?
Unequivocal here.
Say that again, Vinoo. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I don't think he will be vague, because if he's vague here, he's done. Right?
Yeah,
because
right,
and I think he's going to be clear. He's going to be unequivocal here, as he has been in his quotes. But here's the thing: I would be shocked if it gets to that point.
So, Julie,
I think there's just too much going on right here for this to continue at present.
Let me just quickly read the president's tweet. Julie, before you go forward, the president just tweeted a minute ago in response to this. Michael Avenatti is a third-rate lawyer who is good at making false accusations like he did on me and like he is now doing on Judge Brett Kavanaugh. He is just looking for attention and doesn't want people to look at his past record and relationships. A total lowlife. Okay, so that's the president's response thus far. So, Julie, you were going to sort of pick it up from where Vinoo left off. What were you going to say?
I hope to gosh I don't have to respond to that.
No, it's okay.
It always seems to dumb it down. I think that the issue is when you talk about kind of what we're looking for. Remember, anytime you are cross-examining someone, you aren't neutral. You are looking to catch them in a lie. And so, you know, whether it's for a political reason or whether it's just simply you're a prosecutor who believes someone's guilty or not guilty, you have an agenda when you're cross-examining someone. And so, you know, I'm not sure that the most important and pressing issue is why she didn't come forward sooner. I think the pressing issue is her ability to remember or not remember. And so one of the biggest issues is, was she drinking? You know, like, these are the questions you're going to want to ask, because if she's drinking, does that impair her ability to remember? Those are the type of issues that are going to be most relevant in determining whether she got it right in her recollection of what occurred. And so I think it's less, and I think the second issue, of course, is I think bias. Is there something about either the nature of her relationship with him, her political views, that may in any way impact her ability to be fully honest? But I think the minute you start going down the road of saying she didn't come forward, this isn't, you know, as Vinoo suggested about, this isn't sympathy. That there are facts that, you know, we've talked about in terms of statistically why individuals don't come forward. And we see it, we saw it in Bill Cosby, we saw it in Harvey Weinstein, and we saw it in the Catholic Church. And so that part is not about sympathy. It's about the fact that people don't come forward because of threat of retaliation, embarrassment, and the like. You know, and it's funny when we think about it. You know, I was speaking to, you know, a family member the other day, and for the first time I brought up something that happened to me when I was younger that I'd never brought up before, because it didn't come into my mind until all this started to happen. It sure as hell happened, but it wasn't something that, you know, I brought with me until this kind of topic started coming up.
Let me just, Anne-Marie just read the tweet from the President of the United States, in part, which reads, Avenatti's a third-rate lawyer who is good at making false accusations like he did on me and like he is now doing on Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Let's just remind our viewers that on August 21st, the president's lawyer, Michael Cohen, reached a plea deal with federal prosecutors in their investigation into that $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels and a payment to Karen McDougal, both of whom have said that they had affairs with Donald Trump. And in pleading guilty, Mr. Cohen implicated President Trump, telling the court that he paid off Daniels at the direction, this is quoting from that plea deal, at the direction of the candidate for the principal purpose of influencing the election. So I don't know what part of the false accusation the president is talking about, but in terms of what he says there, like he did on me,
right.
We wanted to point that out. All right, guys, we are getting down to the bottom of the hour. Julie Rendelman, Vinoo Varghese, we thank you both so much for spending time with us. talking about this. This discussion is going to continue into the next couple of hours because we're going to be expecting at least to hear from the Senate. We know that they're looking into the affidavit that Mr. Avenatti has made available to the Senate Judiciary Committee. We know Democrats are already starting to respond, but we have yet to hear from Chairman Grassley and from some of the other Republicans. So this is not over by a long shot. We don't even know what tomorrow is going to bring.
It's so true, but I can tell you, that statement from Brett Kavanaugh saying this is the twilight zone for him and nothing like this ever happened gives us a little bit of an inkling as to, whether or not we'll see him withdraw his name. He seems to be doubling down.
All right, more to unpack here. We'll have much more reporting on this throughout the course of the day. You are streaming.